Hello and welcome to this month's Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series. We're going to get started on this month's webinar titled Better Mentoring for the LGBTQ Youth in Your Program, Stepping Up to the Challenge. This is the June webinar in the 2012 Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series, and I'll be your host today. I'm Megan Ferns, the Assistant Program Manager at Oregon Mentors. The Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series is managed by several different mentoring technical assistance providers. And with us today we have Sarah Kramer from Friends for Youth, April Rorden with the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota, and Celeste Jansen also with Oregon Mentors. Sarah and April will be answering your questions and encouraging chat throughout today's webinar. So we'll just wait a few more minutes for folks to continue to log on. Okay, looks like we're getting our slides going now. So as I mentioned, I'm Megan Ferns, Assistant Program Manager with Oregon Mentors. I'll be your host and moderator today. Also guiding us through this webinar, we have Sarah Kramer with Friends for Youth, April Rorden of the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota, and Celeste Jansen also with Oregon Mentors. So as we're letting other people log on to today's webinar, we'll just review a few things. As a reminder, after today's webinar, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and see the webinar again. We'll also give you show you how to log on to the mentoring forums. It's a great place to chat and share resources, and Sarah's going to show us how to do that at the end of the webinar. And just a reminder, we're always looking for your feedback, so at the end of the webinar, if you could please answer the short survey we'll send. Very appreciated. Okay. So we always want this to be a participatory experience and a chance for everyone to interact with experts and peers in the field of mentoring. You'll notice that on the right-hand side of your screen you have a question dialog box, and you can use that to chat or ask a question. You can do that at any time, and April or Sarah will queue up your question and try to respond. We'll also have a few exercises where we'll encourage everyone to type an answer in the question box. So we usually get started with these webinars by figuring out who's joining us today. So we'd like to find out more about you, and we're going to launch our first series of polls. So with this first poll, we'd like to find out what your experience in the field of mentoring is. You can just go ahead and indicate your experience in the field. It looks like we have about half of our registered attendees on with us right now, so we may have more folks joining as we continue. Looks like we have a lot of experience joining us today, which is fantastic, should contribute to the depth of today's discussion. And then the second poll, we'd just like to find out what your role is in the field of mentoring, if you're representing a mentoring program, a technical assistance provider, a researcher, funder, or other. So you can go ahead and select your role. Great. Looks like most folks are joining us on behalf of a mentoring program. So that's fantastic. We have a lot of information about how to implement some of this feedback from our panelists for programming. So it's great we have so many program representatives on today's webinar. Okay. So today's webinar is divided into 3 parts. We're going to quickly begin by covering the definitions on today's topic, working with LGBTQ youth, just to make sure we can get everyone on the same page. Then we'll move to talking about research literature and important statistics about LGBTQ youth. And finally, we plan to spend a large chunk of time discussing programming suggestions. So we're lucky to have 2 great panelists on the line with us today. We're joined by Christian Rummell, who is the Executive Director of Mentorist and has also worked with Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, the National Mentoring Center, and Education Northwest, and directly in a mentoring program with the I Have a Dream Foundation. Our second panelist on the line today is Linda Peterson. Linda joins us from the Massachusetts Mentoring Partnership, where she's the Manager of Training and Technical Assistance. Linda wrote and conducts trainings on LGBTQ youth and support for mentoring program staff. And Linda is involved in the Boston PFLAG and North Shore Pride Incorporated. Welcome, Christian and Linda.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple more polls that we were going to launch, but I think first, Linda, if you wouldn't mind getting us started by helping us go over some definitions to ensure that we're all using the same terminology.
Yeah, this is Celeste Jansen with Oregon Mentors. Linda is having trouble getting on, so I'm going to go ahead and cover the definitions, and then hopefully we'll get Linda on in just a moment. It's important when we're using this term, LGBTQ, to understand exactly what that means. So we've got some definitions here on the screen. Some folks will say LGBT, LGBTQ is another form, or some folks actually change the G and the L. So just keep in mind today that these terms are used interchangeably. L is the term for lesbian. It's used for women who are homosexual, women who are in relationships with other women. G, gay, is typically used to describe men who are homosexual, but the term can also be used for women as well. B is meaning bisexual, someone who's romantic, and sexual attraction is directed to both genders. T, transgender. That describes someone whose gender identity or expression differs from what he or she was associated with at birth. And we'll talk more about this. And Q is for
Hi,
questions.
this is Linda. I'm wondering if you can hear me now?
Hi, Linda. Great to have you. Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you. I can't see anything, but I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, we are on the webinar right now, and we're talking about the LGBTQ definitions. I've just gone over LGBT and Q for questioning someone who's unsure of his or her sexual orientation and questioning the identity of his or her feelings. On the next slide, we have a few more definitions, and so if we could go ahead and have the slides advance. The last definition, sexual orientation, is the direction of one's sexual attraction based on feelings and not behavior. Linda, is there anything specifically for LGBTQ definitions that you'd like to make sure that we cover?
I would like to just say that these are the standards. It doesn't mean that maybe in your part of the country you may use things a little bit differently. But for the sake of this webinar, I think it would be important for us to just stay consistent with what we see these terms are and understand that there could be some fluidity with some people depending on what region they are from.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I think we're going to dive into Christian's feedback by starting with a poll. We'd just like to get a sense of whether your program serves youth that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning. So you can select one. Yes, we are certain that some of our youth identify as LGBTQ. Yes, but suspect so. We don't really know. We have no idea. We don't serve LGBTQ youth. So if you could please indicate how your program
Okay, we're at 81% voted. We'll wait for a couple more, and now we will show
Well,
the
everybody's
results.
waiting. I just thought I'd throw out there this ought to be interesting from my perspective because I can't see any of the slides. So if I throw in something at the wrong place and time, just kind of bear with me and we'll just keep on going when it's my turn.
Great, thank you.
We'll let you know, Linda, that 55% of folks on the line said yes, we are certain some of our youth identify as LGBTQ. So it looks like this is going to be really relevant information for them.
Fabulous.
And then the second poll we like to just do real quickly is in our mentoring program, we provide low, moderate, or high levels of targeted services to LGBTQ youth. So your response selections are none, we don't provide mentoring services for LGBTQ youth. Low, we know there's a need but haven't taken any steps. Moderate, initial steps in creating a more inclusive climate. Or high, we've developed and use inclusive operations and practice. So if you can please indicate your program practice.
Okay, here are the results.
So it looks like 53%, the majority of folks on the line say low, we know there's a need but haven't taken any steps. So again, this is great that you're on the line participating today. Linda and Christian both have some really great feedback for program implementation. So it should get you started down the right track. So I think we'll start with you, Christian. Can you tell us, are there any studies about mentoring LGBTQ youth?
Well, I'd like to just share a little bit about why it's important to kind of look over some of the research on this topic. I'll cover a little bit, and it can give us some ideas, some tips, some suggestions. But really, the ultimate goal for using the research and kind of learning a little bit more is for all of us to be a little bit more intentional with how we provide mentoring services to gay youth. And as I think most of us know, just in doing mentoring in general, that there are a lot of rewards that are part of this work. But indeed, there are also a lot of risks that are involved as well. And so I really I want to spend a little bit of time just kind of highlighting what some of those risks are, and going through and having a bit of an overview for the hows and whys that we can use research to be better practitioners in terms of working with gay youth. I'd like to start off actually on the next slide, just kind of having us unpack kind of our own experiences. And I know that the polls kind of gave a really good idea of where you all are in terms of the temperature of services that you're providing for this population. But I'd like if you could use the chat box and just type in a few words or a sentence about how in your own work, what types of struggles or challenges do you see some of the gay youth facing in your program? So if you could just take a few moments. Again, we want to make this as interactive as possible, and part of that is really kind of looking at what you see on a day-to-day basis. What are some of those challenges that you see some of the young people in your program facing?
Okay, so we're getting a couple of responses. This is Sarah from Friends for Youth. Should I go ahead and read some of these aloud?
That would be great.
Great. Okay, so Tim is saying increased risk of homelessness. Erica says stigma and bullying at school, depression, feeling isolated. Sarah is saying bullying and isolation. Joel says additional layers of self-searching. Samantha says knowing a stable, healthy GLBT adult. Lisa says small rural community that is challenging for youth to be out in. Ellen is saying bullying at school, unsupportive family environment. James says youth are exploring their sexuality, but it contradicts the parents' belief leading to conflict. Delia is saying bullying, depression, suicidal ideation. Rosaline says non-inclusive school environments. Sarah says academic struggles as a result. Kelly says coming out of the closet. Angelina says coming out to the family. Well, these are great. We're getting a lot of good responses.
These are really great.
Alicia says struggling to fit in with others who are the norm. Rosaline also says lack of targeted services for LGBTQ youth. Natalie says identifying our youth as gay. Most of our mentees enter before puberty, so we do not know if they are gay. Oh, James says issues with reparative therapy among some mentors. There's an interesting bill happening in California right now that would really limit that. Lori says our program is in the Deep South, the Bible Belt, where services are not readily available. Tina says don't do cross-gender matching, so for trans youth becomes an issue. I think she's asking a question here, do we match on gender identity or physical sex? Maybe you can get into that a little bit later, Christian.
Yep.
And Gavin says judging communities. There's a couple more, but I think that's a good list. Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for kind of sharing your own experiences and what you're seeing out there on the front lines. On the next slide, I want to share a little bit about my own experience and my own struggle. And there's a photo of my old high school that I went to back in Delaware. And I would say my story is very kind of indicative of what a lot of folks have gone through. It's nothing that I would say would have been too dramatic. I also grew up in a fairly small town. And I would say that during the 4 years that I spent in this particular building were 4 of the probably most difficult years that I have ever gone through. There was a lot of turbulence and struggle and kind of the sadness that comes with knowing that I was different and that I was kind of experiencing the otherness that comes with trying to figure out who you are in a very different climate. And so during that period of time, you know, I was going through a lot inside, but it was also a time where others had pretty much already labeled me. And you know, I heard a lot of taunts and bullying and experienced being called faggot for the first time. And you know, it definitely was a period of my life that I know that you know, again, was indicative of what a lot of other people have gone through. And you know, I would say that there were a lot of days that I just had hoped to make it through the front door of that building without letting anybody see me cry. And so with all of those experiences, so much of the work that I've done since then is really to try to build kind of awareness and research and kind of best practices so that young people don't have to go through that same experience. And so that's why I'm here today. That's why I've been working on my dissertation and doing this research that I'll share a little bit more with you because it really is something that can be preventable and there can be some really opportunities. There can be some really important opportunities for all of us to make a difference. So, you know, given all of my experiences and some of the things that you know, folks have kind of shared that you've seen, you know, basically I just kind of like to highlight on the next slide that there are actually some published studies out there that can offer some support for you. And mostly I would say it's about the whys it's important for us to provide that support, and then a little bit more about the hows to do that. And so some of the headlines about research. And so on the next slide, I would say there are 3 things that you should take away from what we'll be kind of sharing today. First, that there is a fair amount of studies that describe the need for support. We'll look at some of the risk factors, effects of victimization, social interaction anxiety. Unfortunately, there's not much out there on formal mentoring, and that's something that I'm hoping that my research will help to kind of change and alter. But the good news is that there is a growing body of studies that have just been coming out this year on how role models and informal mentoring can make a difference. So to look at some of the risk factors, it's important to look at climate. It's important to look at kind of those victimization and stress pieces that you've kind of identified in kind of what you've witnessed that a lot of gay youth are experiencing. And then I'll talk about one of the barriers that can get in the way of getting support, even though it may be available, and that's social interaction anxiety. So to give some context for climate, on this slide we have a few more definitions, and this is kind of the climate that a lot of LGBTQ youth experience on a day-to-day basis, and these are also some terms just to be aware of. Homophobia, it's an irrational fear that either results in beliefs or actions that discriminate against LGBT people. Transphobia is focused on gender diverse or gender nonconforming, those that have gender ambiguity, and the fear that it's either through beliefs or in actions that come out. And then heterosexism is basically the institutionalization of these types of phobias that our society ends up regulating or going through kind of just describing the norms of how we're supposed to behave, and they basically legitimize the phobias that are out there. So keeping that climate in mind, what happens whenever a young person brushes up against some of that discrimination or some of the prejudice or the phobias that are out there? And the first thing to kind of think about is that there's a lot of victimization that happens when people are acting out on these phobias. young people are really kind of susceptible to being bullied and that they experience increased levels of stress. GLSEN does a great climate survey every year or every couple of years, and they document some of the bullying that happens in school. And so for gay youth, 75% of them have often experienced bullying through derogatory comments or being physically harassed or even cyberbullied. I would say there's about up to 40% of homeless youth are gay, and that's from a study that came out from the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. There's an increased risk of HIV, particularly for African American and Latino male youth. And those numbers have actually increased or have been increasing over time, where other populations have kind of stayed the same. Risk-taking behaviors include increased drug and alcohol use. They're more likely than straight peers to be trying cocaine or early initiation of drug or alcohol use. They're often engaged in high-risk sexual behaviors. Meth use, if they've ever tried meth, you can see there that there's definitely a heightened number and percentage in the GLBTQ populations versus heterosexual youth. One of the areas that you often hear about is suicide and suicidal ideation. And you know, what I think comes up from some of these studies is that this trend has continued over time. So some of the initial studies back in the 90s were saying about 1/3 of self-reported suicide attempts were from a gay or lesbian youth. Well, you know, that number is still continuing even now, that those numbers are still extremely high. And that's what we end up seeing a lot in headlines, and there's been a lot more attention to that. And you know, whenever you're growing up and you're experiencing all of this otherness, you know, these are some of the ways that by experiencing being a victim or having that stress, these are the stories and kind of the sad ramifications of things that do happen.
Chris, could I jump in just for a second?
Yeah.
Here? This is Linda. I just want to emphasize that location across the country doesn't really matter when it comes to this. And I'm speaking from Massachusetts, which most of the country think of us as the most liberal. We have marriage for same-sex partners here, but yet our suicide rate in comparison between gay kids and straight kids is very similar also. It's 25% of the gay kids and 5% of the straight kids, yet it's almost hidden here because everybody figures, well, you can get married now, so everything is fine. I want people to recognize that that's not necessarily true. The adults may be feeling better, straight, gay, or otherwise, but the young people, this is still just as difficult in Massachusetts as anywhere else across the country.
That's a really great point, and actually, that's an important segue into the next slide, which is a little bit of information about a phenomenon known as social interaction anxiety. So with gay youth that have experienced all of these kind of victimization, stress, negative social sanctions, often whenever they do have support that's available to them, they may not know how to actually access or fully utilize that support. So it's basically they've kind of had all of these experiences that have made it difficult to build trust, even with those that are there to be an advocate for them. And so for mentoring programs, this is something that's really important to know, is that even if you are providing services to this population, that there will be a lot of layers that you're going to have to consider in helping to draw out those opportunities for them to build trust. And that's also with you as a staff person and with their mentors or those advocates that are out there for them. So it's one of those other kind of research areas that I think are really important. A few things, you've learned a little bit about some of the, the risk factors, the statistics that are out there, and some of the questions that you probably are asking are like, what if our program serves younger populations? Like, what if we're working with youth that are, 10 years old? What if we don't have any openly gay youth? I know that multiple folks that responded didn't have, said that you didn't have gay youth that you could identify. Does it really matter for you too? And so, how many of you would say that's important for you? And I'm actually going to do a poll next, which is going to kind of help to highlight why it might be important. And so if we could launch the poll on awareness, that would be great, and self-labeling. Then I'll read the poll when it pops up, and this will kind of highlight why it would be important.
Hi, Christian. We have the poll on ages, and then the awareness question. We actually were hoping that we could have folks type that into the chat so that we can read back their answers.
All right, this is perfect then. So then what we're going to do is, I would say, let's do this. For those of you, if you could identify, if you think that, what is the age of a young person to self-label that they're, you may be gay or lesbian? Is it 10 or 11? Is it 12 or 13, 14, 15, or 16, 17? What age on average do you think that somebody self-labels that he or she might be gay or lesbian? 10 or 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, or 17? So if you could take a moment and just type your response in for the poll, that would be great.
Okay, we've had 82% of people vote. And any more folks that want to vote, if you want to quickly get your vote in, we're going to close the poll in just a few seconds.
This is Sarah. I was just going to add in, we were getting some good comments, but I just want to remind everyone to type in your questions now to have experts answer for later.
Great. Okay, so it looks like 21% said 10 to 11, 43% 12, 13, 30% 14, 15, and 6% said 16 or 17. So let's look on the next slide, and I can give you some of the kind of the average statistics that have been coming out about gay youth versus lesbian youth, and there is a difference. And again, these are averages. It's very different for both kind of populations. But for gay youth, reporting same-sex feelings at age 10, and for lesbians, it's age 11, with first disclosure around 17. And so that's really important for all of us to know, because that is the range that we're providing services. That is middle school through high school. And so a lot of us may not actually know how to offer support as the young person is going through these kind of experiences. And so on the next slide, and I'm going to try to zip through my slides a little faster so that you all can get into some of the practical stuff with Linda. But on the next slide, there's kind of a series of phases that folks may go through as they're kind of going to identify who they are and kind of being part of this process. And so, the awareness starts off, and then there's an exploring that awareness through interacting with others and looking for social support. And that, the ultimate stage of kind of accepting your identity is recognizing that and sharing that you are part of this group that may have been marginalized. So a lot of things are going on inside, and that is not an easy process. But then whenever you're brushing up against some of the victimization and the labeling and the bullying, it causes even more tension, which is why you see some of those risk factors that are there. So the more that we can offer support for these things, the more protection we can give our young people. And so that can be a huge difference, and that's around providing a safe climate, that's around giving role models and advocates, and providing resources that young people can access. And so I'm going to share a little bit about some of the research that is popping up that kind of shows what we can use to make a difference in our work as mentors and in our work as role models and advocates. One of the first studies that has been out there, and this is for college students, was done by Frank Ross, who did his dissertation on informal and formal mentoring relationships. And so he looked at having gay adults matched with gay college students. And these were for looking at what were the trends, what were the things that were out there. And what he found out was that there are some benefits that really happen with that identity development process. And so the mentor, for example, can help the mentee unlearn some of those negative behaviors and learn more positive behaviors. They can gain support for conflict that gives them opportunities to be better prepared to deal with some of the challenges of being labeled or bullied or other things like that. And then, one of the most important parts is gaining access to those positive role models. And so a couple more research studies that have been coming out this year is around natural mentoring relationships, and that one of the studies said they're finding that gay individuals are actually do have access to a variety of natural mentoring relationships, and that they use them for different types of support, whether that's social support, emotional support, gaining access to information, other things like that. So that's actually a good sign that there are some availability out there of natural mentors, those that they can just access. But kind of countering that is that for young people that don't have access, the other study says that 60% of kind of gay youth actually had role models, but some of those were inaccessible role models or role models that were from afar. And for those people that didn't have direct role models, there may be increased psychological distress, or they may not be getting the support that they really do need, or being able to access the kind of strategies that a role model could provide. So those are kind of interesting new studies that are coming out, and I'd recommend all of you to kind of check them out, because it can kind of give you some ideas for our work. And then my own dissertation, and I'm looking at long-term formal mentoring relationships for gay youth, those that were under 18 when they were matched and have been matched for a year or longer. I'm looking at what those relationships look like, what are the benefits, drawbacks, and then that support for identity development. So if any of you have those relationships in your program, please contact me. I would really love to hear from you as well. So I'm going to conclude my section just with kind of offering that there is a need that exists for support. Role models and mentors may offer really important protective benefits. However, if we don't do this intentionally, it could create a lot more harm or reinforce some of those negative kind of experiences that a young person is going through. And so I'm going to pass this over to Linda now to give you a little bit more of those concrete program practices that you can implement to make sure that young people are able to benefit from being in a mentoring program and in a safe mentoring program for them.
Before we switch over to Linda, we have a couple questions, Christian, that I thought maybe we could have you answer right now.
Sure.
Related to some of your research. Angelina is asking if there's any similar data on bisexual youth.
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So what I would say is my research is mostly on gay youth, gay male youth. And it's going to be different for transgender youth and for bisexual youth, because that identity development process is slightly different. And it's important not to lump them all into the same kind of category, although there are some similarities. And so for bisexual populations, I don't have as much access to resources, but I can definitely steer you in the direction with some of the resources that we have at the end of the session.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then one other question.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there's two now. Samantha's asking, is this the CAS's model?
Yeah, actually, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So actually, CAS is one of the sexual identity development models. The model that I'm actually looking at is McCarran and Fassinger, which is it's looking at it more from a social perspective, where your identity is also influenced by those relationships and kind of those experiences you have with others. And so CAS is one of the models that are out there, but I think McCarn and Fassinger is a little bit more appropriate.
Okay, great. And then we're getting quite a few questions of people asking in terms of specific mentoring practices like matching LGBTQ mentees with LGBTQ mentors. So I think Linda's going to be discussing some of that. So for those of you who typed in those questions, we'll be getting to those in just a moment. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So Linda, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what steps programs can take to better serve LGBTQ youth?
Absolutely, and I just want to put out there once again that I can't see any of the slides, so I'm just going by my copies that I have in front of me. So if things seem a little askew, I will try to do my best to keep them contained. I did want to start off, though, mentioning that here at Mass Mentoring Partnership, we're in the midst of our second year of offering trainings for program staff on how to support LGBTQ youth. So it is an evolving process, and as Christian had mentioned, there is some research, and we are learning more every day. We're getting new questions every day and trying to make sure that we're putting out the best practices that we can for programs. I would like to say that it doesn't start right with, okay, we need to have a mentor training right in place. We really want to recommend several steps for programs. And just to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about is having the organization have its own assessment first, and then having staff do some self-reflections on what this all means for them. And then after you've worked through all that, start to think about how is this going to impact our screening, our training, our supporting of mentors, and then finally, how are we actually going to provide a safe space for our LGBTQ youth. One of the things I always like to make sure people walk away with are the don'ts to disclosure, and I believe we do have a slide for that. Quite often, people will think, well, maybe it is just a phase. I don't want to push the young person over into the gay world if they're not really going in that direction. I don't want to be the one to hear about it, so maybe I'll say, let's not talk about it right now, or maybe we'll say, let's just go talk to your mom about it, and we're going to talk about the family in just a few minutes. We want to always make sure we do the same for these youth as we would for any of the youth in our program, and that's work on positive assets, not criticizing, not assuming that there's sexual activity going on, not assuming that this young person has to be sent into counseling at all. So just keep those things in mind when you're thinking as an organization, when you're thinking as a staff person, and then when you're starting to put some trainings together for your actual mentors. There are some first steps that I would like to highlight that programs can take before they even go through a self-assessment, and that's how can we signal to youth that this is a safe space. There are all sorts of stickers and logos and national organizations that are out there that can give you materials to do that. And there is one in particular, one organization that I would like everybody to spend some time on their website, and that's the Human Rights Campaign. And all you need to do is put humanrightscampaign.org. They have some fascinating data on there that I think you'll find both eye-opening, surprising, and then also it'll make you a little bit sad and disturbed. For example, I'm going to highlight one, and it's the statewide school anti-bullying laws and policies. There are such a small number of states who actually have these in place so that it covers these LGBTQ young people. As of now, there are only about 17 states that have these practices as laws and policies in place. There's some variation, some general anti-bullying laws, but being specific just to this cohort of young people, it really is still very, very limited. And then, not surprising, there are only about half of the states in this country have policies and laws in place that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity as far as being hired or fired. And this list goes on and on. So I just want to mention this is something that it's not just the young people, it's for adults, and great information can be found at some of these national organizations. Human Rights Campaign, as I just mentioned. The other one I want to mention is PFLAG, which means Parents, Friends of Lesbians and Gays. They are a national organization that is primarily put in place to help parents figure out how to deal with all of this in their lives. And there are local chapters across the country. I suggest folks also taking a look at their website. See if you have a chapter in your state. They can also be a great resource for you. All right, the other thing I would like to talk about, and these are points to remember, that young people are going to hear this negative slang everywhere. It is so pervasive. In fact, a young couple that I know with a little 6-year-old boy were driving home one day from school, and this was a dad and a daddy couple. And as they were driving home, the little boy was talking about his day in school, and he mentioned, "Oh, but Dad, that is just so gay." This was coming from a 6-year-old who had gay dads. And so Dad pulled over and said, "Do you know what that means when you're saying that's so gay?" He goes, "Oh, I have no idea, but that's what the kids say." And pretty much the words are out there, and young people are using them who know what it means and know how to hurt with it, and others who have just picked up on the words and are just throwing it around. So that's something to be aware of, that these youth are hearing it from friends on the street, in their schools, on the internet, on the radio, on the TV. I know we have some positive shows on the TV, but there are also a lot of negative things that are still out there. And again, I say for last, the family piece, because the family is so critical in all of this, for the good and for bad things that have happened. And again, I'm going to get back to that in just a little bit. So moving on with some other points to remember, whether these young people are out or in the closet, they don't always have that safe place or that person to turn to for guidance and support. Very, very important to think about that, and not to be quick to jump to say you should talk to your family, your mother, your uncle, your brother, because that may not be a safe place for them. And I want to give another quick story. My niece, who is a very out lesbian, had a friend in high school who, on her 18th birthday, she decided it was time to tell her mother that she is a lesbian. Well, she went. She was brave. She did it. She told her mother, and her mother shot her with a gun. Fortunately, she did not kill her, and fortunately, she was able to get out of that household and into a safe place, but the home isn't always a safe place, so I really want folks to keep that in mind. All right, so those are just some of the general overviews that I wanted to share. And now I want you to start thinking about what can we do in our organizations to make sure that we are having policies in place that will accept these young people, that will perhaps accept an LGBT mentor. Many of us have never thought of this before, what policy should actually be in place. What does it mean if we have a transgender mentor? What if we're just a girls-only organization and we have a male-to-female transgender mentor? How are we going to handle that? How will we match this person? These are some general questions that take a lot of thought and are probably going to be done differently depending on your program. So let's start right from the beginning and have some consideration on what should you start assessing back at your organization. Do you have any materials in place that talk about being a welcoming organization, a welcoming mentoring program? Have you had any staff orientations or volunteer trainings on this topic? Do you have any out people in your organization? Are you wondering about some of the people in your organization? Might they be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered? Are you comfortable approaching that person? Maybe they haven't come out in your organization because they haven't felt welcome, or maybe it just hasn't come up and they figure they don't need to share because it's just something that they don't need to share. So lots of things for you to start to look at your organization to see if it is welcoming to the community, for the young people as well as staff, as well as potential mentors, and as well as for families who may have same-sex parents and maybe their children are in your program. That's another piece to start looking at. And after you do that, I really suggest spending some time having staff conduct a self-assessment. We're not saying that we want every staff all the time across the country to be completely and totally all for lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual people. We're not asking people to change how they feel at their core. That would be the perfect world that we would like to get to. But where we are today, we would like people to start to think about, in my professional setting, what am I comfortable with? How would I handle this? How can I talk about this topic comfortably with the young people that are in our program? The question that we always like to ask in our trainings is, how do I respond to anti-gay jokes? That's usually a telltale sign for many things. So again, you're probably looking at the slide right now with a list of self-assessment questions that staff can ask themselves, and then use perhaps at your own staff training to see where you are at comfort levels and see where you think you need to go. Again, not everybody is going to be on the same page at all times as far as their own comfort level, but it's recognizing, am I going to be comfortable working with this community? All right, so once you get your organization and your staff all feeling like, okay, I think we're at a good place here, now let's move on to how we're going to train our mentors, how we're going to work with our youth. Screening, as everybody knows, is one of the key pieces in bringing in mentors to work in your program. And there are some simple steps that you can take to add this as a new component to what you are doing in your screening process. You can use scenarios, asking potential mentors about their comfort level, or you could just flat out ask them what their comfort level is about the topic in general, about perhaps working with a youth who already identifies that way. And then, of course, you want to recognize there are some youth who may have not figured it out yet, who may have figured it out but are not ready to disclose, or who may just have a number of questions regarding this topic. How will the mentors be comfortable in handling it? And ask that question, will you as a mentor be able to be comfortable handling this type of questioning that you may have, or this type of youth who may indeed end up being the one that you're mentoring? Make sure also that you have these materials available. If mentors or potential mentors are coming to your site, let them know that you have those materials here. It's important for them to see that, as well as it's very important for the youth to see those materials throughout your office and your programming there. The next thing I would also suggest is getting some support from local community groups or some of the national groups that I mentioned that work in this field. They are out there. It may take a little bit of time to look for it, but there are newspapers, publications, radio programming, lots of websites where you can get information that would be really, really specific to your region. I know somebody mentioned earlier in one of the polls about being in a small community or perhaps being in a rural community where you wouldn't have something like we do in Boston. We had our Gay Pride a few weeks ago, and there were 100,000 people lining the parade route. You don't always get that, as you know, in rural America. So finding some other group that can identify with that will really help you as you start to think about not just your screening, but how you can start to put your training together for your mentors. And it definitely should be part of your standard mentor training. You may want to ask, do you have it as a standard piece in your training where you talk about it, talk a little bit about disclosure? maybe have a follow-up training where you really can dedicate a good portion of time specifically on this issue. And the next piece that is critical to all of this is actually the support that you can give mentors when they come to you, maybe surprised or concerned or not happy about finding out that one of their young people just disclosed to them that they are either questioning themselves or they're coming out as lesbian, gay, or any of the spectrum that is there. We recently had a program who was talking about this topic and had a mentor that came back to them saying, I think I need some help. I have this little, and it was a young boy who was probably 8 years old. He was very young. He said the first time we got together, we were at a big fair. And at the fair, they had a craft table with jewelry and little things like that. And my mentee wanted to go there and spend some time. And I said, okay, yeah, sure, fine. That's great. He said, but since then, we have gone out a few times to the mall, and my little guy wants to go to the jewelry store, to the earring store. He wants to try on these jewelries and these earrings, and I'm getting a feeling here that there's something going on, and I don't know how to handle it. This mentor knew he could go back to the staff to find out how to answer these questions, how to work through spending his time with the young boy who he felt may be going in the LGBTQ direction. The staff may not have had all the answers right there at the moment, but they made a point of getting information so that this mentor would feel more confident in his working with the young people. So that's just a little bit of how you can start working towards your organization, your staff, and your mentoring support. And then also, most importantly, how are you going to support your youth? As you can see, there is should be a slide up there now that says, yes, recognize that the home may or may not be a safe place for a youth. So don't necessarily you want to encourage them to come out at the home. And then you may also want to recognize that they may be very out at your program and not out at home. So keep that very, very much a confidentiality unless you know for sure that they are out in the home. And it does take a tremendous amount of energy to come out. Some kids may do it easily, but for the most part, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. And just to give you a personal story, I have two friends, a lesbian couple, who last year went through a commitment ceremony. They still weren't ready to be married here in Massachusetts. And I asked one of them if a group of her friends were coming that I had met on one occasion, were her friends all the way from high school. And this woman is 64 years old, and she says no, she wasn't inviting them to the commitment ceremony because they still did not know her life situation. So it takes a tremendous amount of energy, and you don't always come out the same way or at the same time with the many people that are involved in your life. So if it's difficult still for a 64-year-old, think about how difficult it may be for a young person. And then the last few things here is don't assume you know how someone will react to a youth coming out. My own personal story, my two best friends, I lost both of them throughout the process. And at this point, I consider it their loss and not my loss. So think about that with the young people also. And then remember that these youth need the same support and services that all youth need. They have some additional challenges. They have some unique challenges. They need to be given accurate information. They need support in dispelling myths, the stereotypes of what the gay community and the gay lifestyle is all about. And yes, you do want to get role models for youth beyond what they might see on TV or through music. You want to let them know that there are successful, strong, confident people out there in the world who are just the same as they are. It may be that you start with having mentors who are just like them, or at least having mentors who can help them discover who these great people are. So I'm going to end with tips for mentors, something that you can provide at all of your mentor trainings. Put it in some of your literature here. It's never assuming that the youth is heterosexual. Recognize that you cannot tell someone just by looking at them. There may be those flamboyant people out there that you're going to say, aha, she is, he is. Definitely don't always be sure unless you know that you have been told right by the person themselves. Use inclusive language. Use the language that the young people use themselves. Don't try to throw out all sorts of different words if those aren't the words the young people are using. Be supportive. Of course, in mentoring, we're always saying be supportive. Sometimes youth are questioning. They may say, yes, I am straight, but then they find themselves attracted to the same sex. Be supportive no matter how they are calling themselves. You want to be right there with them. And again, maintain confidentiality. It really, really is important. Christian mentioned how many of our young people are homeless, have been sent out to the street, have been kicked out of their families, have nowhere else to go. So you don't want to be the cause of any of that. Keep the confidentiality at all times. And then finally, be aware of your own attitudes. We're not asking you to completely change who you are, what your beliefs are, but take the professional road when it comes to working and with these young people, with the mentors, and with their families. And when in doubt, seek support, have the mentors seek support with you, and please for you to seek support from the many professionals that are out there and help your program to become a welcoming program. And I love the slide that we have up there. It's the welcome mat with all the different colors. And at the end of the day, that's how we want to be perceived in our mentoring programs. We want to be welcoming of all youth all the time. And with that, I'm going to stop right there to see if we have any questions. I would also like to know what your programs are currently offering as far as trainings for your mentors. Are you doing anything as far as intake for sexual orientation of your youth? Any of the topics that we have there, I would love to see if people have some comments they would like to make. And that's it. I'm going to stop right here.
Okay, well, we do have quite a few great questions here. Let's see. I'm going to start with some that seem fairly easy to answer. Linda, when you were talking about having staff take a self-assessment, do you have any resources that you recommend or any samples that you could maybe send us and we can make that available through the Mentoring Forums link?
There's actually a publication that came out in 2005 that has some great pieces in it. And I think you probably can find it online. I'm not 100% sure, though, at this point. It's called Mentoring Tactics. And I will also send it along so that you can send it out to everybody in case folks do have a hard time finding it.
Okay, that must be from, that's the CARS publication, right?
Yep, and it's on the resource list. Yep.
Okay,
so
perfect.
it's actually in the slides, so that if anybody wants to just click on the link through the slides, it's ent.org, and it's there.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think we're getting some, here's another question from Brad. What is the level of confidentiality expected in terms of mentors, mentees, and the supporting agency?
I would say that's the same as all confidentiality. If a mentor is concerned about a young person, about that they're going to disclose or they have disclosed, usually when you work with your staff, all of that stays within there. It's what happens in the house stays in the house, so to speak. And I would say make it as important as any other level of confidentiality that you have between the program, the mentor, and the mentee. Now, if Christian, you want to jump in with any of these here, certainly feel free to do so.
You know, I mean, the only thing, the other point I would make is working within mental health settings. Counseling will often kind of suggests that you take a client-centered approach, and so it's always meeting where the young person is, where they're coming into the treatment. And I would say that that's why confidentiality is so important in this setting as well as it would be as working in a mental health setting, because there are so many things that they're going through as they're kind of becoming who they are, and they're brushing up against what may be like lack of parental support or lack of awareness by some of their peers about who they are as they're doing this. And so in terms of confidentiality, it's just super important to make sure that you meet the young person where he or she is, and that you really find out, from them what their expectations of that privacy is, and set that up front.
Great. I would just add on from a practitioner standpoint too, to make sure you let your mentors know that they need to talk to you as program staff about this to help figure it out, the right way to go about doing it, not just to do it on their own, right?
Right.
I'm sure you would echo that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's see, we've got a couple other questions. Some questions around specifically matching LGBTQ youth with LGBTQ mentors. Christian, I know that you've had a hard time finding any of those specific matches, but is there any research behind it? Are there programs who, what's the best practice response to that?
And it's a great question. The assumption is that there could be some really unique benefits. If you have a gay individual or a transgender individual who's navigated through this process and they've done, they've gotten to a synthesized kind of identity, they feel good about who they are, that they can really share some of those tips and strategies with a younger person that's just kind of going through that in a way that would be very unique. I would liken that to the, kind of racial identity development or cultural identity development. Having somebody that's gone through that experience can really offer a lot of kind of in-depth knowledge that may not happen. Now, on the other end is that I did kind of a pilot in my doctoral research, and it was with a gay adult who had a straight mentor. And he said that just having that mentor made a huge difference because the relationship offered him a really unique type of support. And that, when he finally came out to him after, 7 or 8 years in their mentoring relationship, that kind of positive affirmation really helped him. And so, there isn't research that says, and it would kind of be cross-race versus same-race matching. But I would argue, and I'm hoping to find out, that there may be some unique benefits, and that there are some opportunities. So for programs that aren't currently matching, which I think is pretty much the norm, that we may be able to find that there could be some really unique things that offers some very targeted support. And so at this point, there's very little out there, though.
There's one piece I would like to add on to this is, depending on the type of program, many programs ask the parents what type of mentor they're looking for. And I can think of programs who want to know, would you be comfortable with your child with a gay mentor? And so depending on your program, those are some pieces that you certainly want to consider also. They may say yes, they may say no, they may not know that their child is identifying in this spectrum here. So that's a whole other piece just to be aware of when you're thinking through your matching process.
Okay, so
great.
It looks like we're coming up on time, but if you have some more questions, feel free to stay on the line, and you can address those with our experts after we close. So before we go, we just want to remind you that you will get information on how to access this presentation following the webinar. And Sarah's going to show us how to link to the mentoring forums to further this discussion. And please don't forget to help us improve by sharing some feedback in a short survey. And Sarah, do you want to go ahead and show us how to link to the mentoring forums?
Sure. I just, if someone can, I guess I'll make myself the presenter here so you can see my screen. Okay, so mentoring forums. This is a site. Whoops, got some things going here. Mentoring forums is from the National Mentoring Center at Education Northwest. This is a kind of a collaborative site where we've been posting information about our webinars. You can see you don't have to log in, you don't have to become a member, but right here under the second topic we have our collaborative webinar series and other events. And this is where we've been posting information about each webinar that's coming up. And so if you have additional questions that we didn't get to, and I know we've had quite a few other questions come through, make sure to go here, go online and type in your questions, and we'll send those links also to our expert panelists who are on today, and we can have more of a conversation there. So that's a great place to go for more information.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, and I just wanted to remind everybody that our next collaborative webinar is July 19th, and we'll be on the topic of pushing the boundaries of mentoring, a sneak preview of the 2012 Summer Institute on Youth Mentoring. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you should see a list of our upcoming webinars. We want to call your attention to an incredible opportunity to take advantage of some free resources from the PPV Public-Private Ventures. All this month they're giving out free resources, and you can go to their website to learn more.
Can I add to that that they are mailing out hard copies of their research booklets for no cost. Programs just need to pay for mailing costs. So this is a great opportunity to go to ppv.org, and you can order online any of their resources. They have a number of really excellent mentoring resources that you can get for free.
Great. And according to my clock, we're up on time, but we just want to say thank you to everyone for participating. And if you want to learn more about the collaborative, please stay on the line, and we'll field any other questions. And thank you all for joining.